Hello, welcome to the 2022 Urban Tree Festival. My name is Greg Packman, and I'm one of the organisers of the Urban Tree Festival, and I'll be hosting this session. So the Urban Tree Festival is a celebration of all things urban trees, their benefits and beauty, majesty and magic. The main aim of the festival is it seeks to connect tree lovers, tree newcomers alike, with their local urban trees, connecting people to each other and to share tree knowledge far and wide. The festival runs until this coming Sunday, the 22nd. We have a wide range of fantastic events, both online and this year in real life. Amazing. So yeah, please check out the website, see what spaces are still left, what other online content we have. The festival is run and organised by volunteers, and although we're very kindly supported by organisations such as the Woodland Trust and the Greater London Authority, we're very reliant upon donations to help us deliver the festival. So anybody who has donated, a big thank you. Anybody who'd like to, also that's muchly appreciated. So I will introduce this afternoon's speaker. This is Tom Reed of the Woodland Trust, who is the Trust Citizen Science Officer for the Ancient Tree Inventory, and joined the Trust in 2019 to oversee the delivery of the Ancient Tree Inventory project and coordinates a national network of volunteer verifiers who play a really important and crucial role in recording and verifying trees to the inventory. Anyone who came last year, Tom did a fantastic webinar on identifying and recording ancient and veteran trees. And there's a bit of a difference in this year's. I'll leave that to Tom to explain, because he can do a far better job than I can. So we're in the webinar format, so you can't physically see each other and your microphones are automatically muted. But we have a chat function, so by all means, please use the chat if you want to make any comments. Please make sure to select all panelists and attendees, because otherwise it just comes to me directly. We'll have time at the end for a Q&A session, so there's a separate Q&A box, which makes it much easier for me to find and ask the questions. And then after about 2, we'll then go to a Q&A to ask some questions. So I will mute myself and hand over to Tom, who will do today's presentation. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Greg. And thank you for the introduction, and to everyone who has joined us here this afternoon to listen to me talk about urban ancient trees. So as Greg kindly introduced, I oversee the Ancient Tree Inventory project at the Woodland Trust. So this is a project to do with mapping the locations of ancient, veteran and notable trees. However, that project isn't going to be the focus of this talk. In this talk, I'm going to be sort of celebrating some examples of urban ancient trees and talking about the subject of ancient tree protection or lack of. And we've got some slides later on about a new exciting campaign that we're about to launch called Living Legends. So yeah, I'll tell you about that later on. But just before we make a start, I wanted to kick off with a bit of a question, something that you can have a go at here. So I've got a question here for you. So I wanted to ask you, can you order what you see on screen? Can you order these from oldest to youngest? So we have on number A, or letter A, sorry, we have the Crouch Oak. You can see on the big image on the left-hand panel there. Letter B, you've got the Arrival of the Black Death, and C, you've got Henry VIII, or the life of Henry. Chat, if you want to just put the order, so write the letters in the order that you think these occur in, from oldest to youngest. Which one do you think is oldest? Which one do you think is youngest? Put your answers in the chat and we'll see what people come back with. So this will also be a test of your history knowledge as well as your tree knowledge. If you don't know, feel free to have a guess as well. Just a bit of an icebreaker and a muse to get us going. So I can see some answers in the chat. We've got BCA, BAC, ABC, BCA. I think we're going to have almost every combination of letters, which is good to see. Good to see we haven't got a consensus. Okay, just give a couple of seconds more in case anyone is still trying to guess. ACB, BAC, BAD. Well, we've introduced a D. I'm not sure where that one came from. Okay, folks, I'm going to reveal the answers because I know you're all eager and waiting. So the correct answer is, well, we don't truly know, because we never do with ancient trees unless there's a sign that says I was planted in this particular day, or to mark the birth of this particular king or queen or a particular historical event. But of course we do have dendrochronology and we do have educated guesses, and we think that the crouch oak may be around about 600 years of age, if not potentially 800 years of age. To put that in context of the other two well-known historical events, the Black Death, we know it arrived in the UK in 1348. Henry VIII, we know he lived from 1491 to 1547. So what we can be fairly sure of is that at some time between these two major events in our history, this tree was alive, either as a sapling or as a mature tree. And if the older estimates of 800 years are true, then it's possible that this tree is actually older, or was alive before the arrival of the Black Death in the UK. So that would place it around about the 1200s to 1250 onwards, which is amazing, right? I mean, it's incredible that you can go out and physically touch something that was alive during that time, or if not older. And how many other living things are there out there where you can say that? So I just wanted to kind of launch that as a starting exercise, just to get your brains going in terms of how we sort of perceive these trees. You know, it's very easy to just look at trees and think, oh, wow, that's an amazing tree, or it's an interesting shape, but you kind of just forget truly how old it is. And when you compare them to you know, well-known historical events, or maybe well-known architecture, and you know, like historical architecture, that is, you start to sort of, it puts it in perspective and it makes it relatable. So yeah, I hope you found that kind of interesting to set the scene as to what we're talking about this morning. This the crouch oak, it, just to let you know, it was also a Tree of the Year shortlisted tree in 2020. So you can see from this photo, it now sits along a road there. So there's a residential area to the left as well that you can't see from this image. But this is now an urban tree, and you can't help but wonder, you know, the changes that it's seen in its life, and how the land use has changed around it. And just to follow this up, we've got some other examples of urban ancient trees. So I wanted to give you some examples of places in the urban landscape where you might expect to find ancient trees. Of course, they're not by any means common. I'm sure there will be many people on the call here who perhaps have never seen a tree like this in an urban environment, because they are very rare, but that's exactly why we need to make sure we celebrate them and protect them. On the left, we've got an example of an elm tree. In fact, this may well be one of the largest and oldest remaining elms in Europe, if not indeed the UK. It's one of what's known as the Preston twins. There are actually two trees that were of a similar age and size, and one of them sadly has fallen, collapsed. But there's one of them remains, and you can still visit it today, and it's in Preston Park in Brighton, if you want to go visit it. And it sits within an urban park, you know, very close to a road, very close to a footpath, there to be enjoyed and respected. It's just incredible to think that you would have something like that in an urban park. And indeed, the example on the right is similar in that you know, you have this enormous tree. It's a sweet chestnut in Buckingham Park, also in Brighton as well. You can even see signs of how it's been managed in the past. But you might be thinking, you know, I've been to a park before. I've not seen anything like this, and clearly you can see in the background there's this is like an urban playing fields now. So you've got you know, children who meet there to attend their Saturday morning football club, or you have tennis courts nearby and people walking their dog. But these sort of living monuments are there, and an indication of, you know, past land use and how it's changed. Just to stick with the example here, actually, of the sweet chestnut, if I go to the next slide, you can see we've got a comparison of a historic map and a satellite image. This is actually a really handy feature of the Ancient Tree Inventory website. You can select different mapping layers and bring up a mapping layer that shows, well, it's the first edition of the Ordnance Survey map, so it dates to between 1860 to 1890 as a mapping layer on the site. And it's really interesting to cross compare that with the modern day satellite image. You get a sense of how, just in a relatively short period of time, you know, 150 years or so, how much land use has changed. And you know, what I noticed from looking at this example here is on the old map, it's showing as Buckingham House, whereas on the right hand satellite modern day image showing as Buckingham Park. So originally this would have had a large house, which I'm sure was called Buckingham House, and it most likely would have been a private estate, so you wouldn't have really had people accessing this site as they are now. You can even see where on what looks like a bowling green, you see you've got these tennis courts down here. That would have been the site of the original house, and all of this space here was described as the lawn. And you can see that on the old map, some of those trees are still visible today. If we look at the example on the top right there, we can see there is definitely a tree still associated with that upper part right of the field. And same for where this green icon is. That's where the pin icon for the sweet chestnut that I showed you on the previous slide is plotted, and there are actually two of a very similar size, just growing right, you know, next door to each other. And you can see that on the historic map. I think the pin actually slightly blocks out the tree on the old map there, but you know, when you remove that pin, you can see that both trees are plotted. You know, and this is just a handy tip, I suppose, for anyone using the Ancient Tree Inventory. Have a look when you're walking around local areas. If you think the landscape looks quite old, if there are some examples of like big trees or old looking trees, then do have a look at the historic map. You might be interested to see how land use has changed. Obviously now you have a lot more public access. You know, that will maybe add pressures to these trees in the future, any sort of threats such as compaction to roots. And these trees now need to have management considerations, you know, to account for the increased footfall, whereas before they didn't. And you can see that they were part of a landscape where trees were sort of allowed to grow in an open grown environment. So that's why we can expect them to reach that phenomenal size, because they're not really competing for light and nutrients in the same way they would if they were growing in a woodland. And of course, sweet chestnut are naturally a large species. They do reach very large sizes. So I just thought I'd share that example. So urban parks are a great place to find ancient trees. Here are some other sort of less, maybe less likely examples, but all the more rare and irreplaceable. This is an example of an ancient crack willow. And you know, how many times have you seen a crack willow like that? I mean, you know, to reach that phenomenal size and extent, it's actually growing on the edge of a shopping centre car park now. You can see it's been retained. You can see in the background there are some younger trees that have been planted to make the area greener. But it's great that this tree has been retained. Hopefully it's still in a great condition as well. Can see some signs of sort of some management towards the top right there. It's been cut back a bit. So it's obviously known, and it was obviously when the plans to develop this site were made, it was obviously identified as a tree to be retained, which is great. But you can't help but wonder, you know, how many trees like this would there have been, or how many have been lost. So this is why, you know, the Woodland Trust wants to do more to protect these trees, and why we have the upcoming Living Legends campaign, which I will talk about shortly. Just a few more examples to share though before I do. You can also look in residential areas. There are some examples of trees that have survived in either village greens or areas of like amenity grassland like this. So this is the Wisham Oak in Monmouthshire. It's part of the Wisham housing estate. And for me, just this image evokes a lot of sympathy really for this tree. You know, you get a sense of just how much the land has changed around it, and it's sort of surviving in this circular pocket of land that's now its home, and protected by some metal fencing there to presumably to stop residents maybe parking their cars on this bit of green space. And obviously when the housing estate was developed many years ago, it was obviously identified as a feature to be retained, which is why it sits in the center of this roundabout. So so great that was the case, and that the tree wasn't removed altogether. But still, it's for me, it just evokes a great sense of sympathy. Really, it has that image of a lonely tree, you know, a survivor, sort of the last of what might have been many trees like that in, you know, if you go back a couple of 100 years ago and think what the former land use could have been, may well have been trees of a similar size. You can already see that this tree has had massive crown reduction as well, presumably to assist with its you know, prolonging its life, but possibly also due to the impact of the road and the safety element needing to make sure that there are no large decaying branches that might cause a threat to health. So there's a quote I've included there. This is one of my favorite quotes about ancient trees from Thomas Pakenham. So he says in one of his books that it's the third stage of a tree's life, he thinks, that evokes or should evoke our strongest sympathy. And I think it's just, you can't help but look at a tree like that and you know, just, yeah, sort of sympathize with its origins, like I say, and think about how many other trees of a similar size or similar status have been lost. But again, great that it's been retained. And we would absolutely strongly encourage people on this talk, if you see trees like this that are surviving in urban areas, you know, to help us map them to the ancient tree inventory, because we want to map them in urban areas just as much as we do in ancient woodlands and wood pastures and parklands as well, where they're more sort of typically associated. I think I just got one more image of an urban ancient tree. This is actually a hawthorn, and this must be one of the largest ancient hawthorns that we have in the UK, or certainly that we have recorded to the ancient tree inventory at least. And you can see it's already showing signs of hollowing as well, which you don't often see that with hawthorn. Actually, you don't see the hollowing trunk. So to have reached a size, an age where that's visible is quite extraordinary. Yet, as you can see from the background, you know, this tree now survives in a well within a residential area. You can see that this is there's a line of garages in the background there, and this tree just survives on a pocket of soil that's been retained. And to me, almost this image looks slightly photoshopped. You know, you can imagine that the background has been photoshopped on, and you can sort of imagine taking this tree and putting it in a parkland, and it would just look so much more natural. And you can sort of appreciate that the landscape it has come from, and how the landscape must have changed over the years. And again, can't help but wonder how many trees like this would there have been, and how many have been lost. Amazing that something like this can survive, you know, within a residential area. Hawthorn, of course, are a very resilient species, I'm sure you know. So again, don't just focus on the big trees, the sweet chestnuts, the oaks, the beeches, the yews. Do look for examples of trees like this as well, because these are, or particularly hawthorn and field maple and hazel, older. These are the trees which perhaps are less well represented on the ATI, and people are more likely to walk past them and not necessarily realise how old they are. As always, look for signs of decay features, such as like the hollowing trunk there that I've pointed out. So that was some examples of ancient urban trees, and there are many more. These were just some that I happened to pick out, reflecting the different environments that you might expect to find ancient and veteran trees. But we've got a case study coming up in just a moment, which talks about an example of a tree that has gained strong protection, if you like, and the effort that we went to. Just some context before that, though. I wanted to just kind of highlight the problem that, you know, some people are not aware of the current status of ancient and veteran trees in the UK. I mean, as I've already said, they're immensely important habitats, you know, not just for wildlife, but also they're a living link to the past, aren't they? You know, thinking about our links with historical events or ways in which people have interacted or managed trees in the past, such as pollarding. They have that like cultural link, and of course they are aesthetically very important. You know, they add character to our landscape, and they are just best described as living monuments or even sculptures. So they have that huge aesthetic appeal as well. But the problem is that there's currently no automatic legal protected status for ancient and veteran trees. So despite them being, you know, immensely rare and hugely valuable for wildlife, hugely treasured, you know, culturally, they have no automatic legal protected status. So which means that they have even less legal protection than most wildlife and habitats. You know, certainly nothing compared to the likes of European protected species status, you know, for wildlife. But also they have even less equivalent than like built heritage. So if you think of scheduled monument status, for example, which protects some of our most prized ancient monuments and listed buildings, ancient trees don't have that same equivalent protection, even though they may well be as old as some of those. So look at the example on screen. We've got a yew tree there. It's a veteran yew tree growing within a churchyard. So this is a very iconic place to find an old yew tree. The church behind it is probably a lot more protected than the tree. And I'm not saying that, you know, that the church necessarily deserves more protection than the tree, but you know, it's when you're making that comparison, the fact that you can have something that is older than, you know, the listed building to which it's adjacent, and it has no protection, that's just quite stark, I think. And certainly that's the case we're trying to make at the moment, is making that comparison and saying that there's a real argument to have stronger protection for these irreplaceable trees. So just before we move on, just wanted to do a quick plug for Living Legends. So it's something we're going to talk about throughout the talk. It's a campaign that we're going to launch very soon that's going to call for stronger protection for these trees. We're going to be having like petitions, and there's going to be a sort of a program of activity throughout the next year or more. So I'll be giving you some more information later and telling you about how you can find more on the web pages and what to follow. Just have that in the back of your mind that we are running this campaign. Before I do that though, we're just going to have a quick case study. So some of you may have already heard of the Grantham Oak, but this case study really just shows what is possible in terms of ancient and veteran tree protection. It shows like the success story of the efforts of a few people to go the extra mile to really make sure that a local resident tree was protected for years to come. So the Grantham Oak, there it is. It's in Grantham on Belton Lane, a tree that's very close to the Woodland Trust's head office, which is on Kempton Way in Grantham. So we were obviously, it was very important that we did something to protect this tree, with it being so close to the Woodland Trust head office. The story though starts in sort of 2017 when a few Woodland Trust colleagues were on their way to work and got in and said, "Oh, did you notice the Grantham Oak this morning? Did you see what was parked underneath it?" And what was spotted was the utility company were basically installing some cables and doing some pipe installation, and they had basically parked a lot of their like diggers and their heavy plant and their materials and fencing and storage containers. The tree was unprotected. Basically, the soil around it was not fenced off. It was, and as well before that, local residents would park their cars underneath the tree as well sometimes, or they would have to track over with vehicles in order to access their driveways. So the roots of this tree were not really that well protected, and this sort of prompted action back in 2017. And it's this story I kind of wanted to share with you because it's a good example of the end result, which I'll share shortly, is just quite inspirational. Really, it shows what's possible. We've got a bit of a timeline coming up, but basically back in 2017, when this was spotted, we contacted the local council, and it was very sort of, the utility company were very amenable, very considerate and compliant with what we were asking, as were the council, very helpful. Very quickly, the heavy equipment that was damaging the tree roots was moved. But that was actually the initial win. That's actually where our protection measures for this tree started, and it launched a bit of a movement for wanting to protect ancient trees, more within the Woodland Trust work. It's a great one to have in the back of our minds when we're talking about protection for old trees, and a good case study of an urban tree that's gained more protection as well. So we obviously needed to make sure that this tree stayed safe. So first of all, it was a case of building up a good working relationship with both the local authority and the utility company. That of course took some time to continue the protection measures, but following on from initially reporting the problem back in November 2017, we then sort of went that extra step further to talk with the council and put together a proposal really of sort of protection measures, and tried to reassure that there would be some financial solution for this. It came as part of our project at the time, which was PPL funded. It was called Street Trees, and so there was funding available to actually do more to protect this tree. So we made the most of that funding, and from there, once that was in place, that gave us the sure footing to really go that extra mile. And we got the local press were contacted. A few months later, a senior enforcement officer at the council and an arboricultural consultant visited the site as well. And from there, the tree was getting the professional attention that it deserved. If I just move to the next slide here, but I'm not going to read through the whole timeline because there's so much that happened. It's just to give you an overview of the immense work that went into protecting this tree. In July 2018, so a cabinet member for the environment at the local council gave his support and visited the site as well. So this tree sort of made it onto the agenda of local politics, and a proposal was then later put to the council, and a timeline for delivery of the protection measures as well. That included things like the posts that were put in place. We've actually got a photo that will show this in a moment, but there are now some posts and rope to stop people and vehicles tracking over the soil, and some bark chippings as well, which would create more protection zone under the canopy, and more of like an established protection zone. Because it's what's often not realised with urban trees is the impact of, pressures on the roots. So in an urban context, often it's sort of dead branches in the canopy that are seen as like the threat to health, or a risk to health. But to the tree, so the greatest damage you can do sometimes is to the root system, and that's kind of often unseen, and doesn't sort of manifest itself visually in the tree until much later on, and to which time the damage has already been done. So that's why a lot of the protection measures focused on the root protection area. So the bark chippings eventually will degrade over time, and they will help to encourage some earthworm activity as well, similar to kind of mulching has that effect, where you encourage earthworm activity in the soil, and that helps to aerate the roots. So if they've been compressed, then you start to restore and reduce the pressure on the root system. So that's why that was done. And of course, the residents were also widely consulted as well. So we made sure that they were informed as to what was happening, and the residents were very understanding as well, and we're glad that respect and justice was being done for this tree. And I think it just shows that it was kind of a recipe for success, that both the council and the utility company, the arboricultural consultants, local politicians, and the residents were all very much in favour of seeing greater protection for this tree, which I think was like a recipe for success. Indeed, in 2018, in December, the tree gained even more attention with local TV and press interviews that were held at the tree itself. And in 2019, the posts, rope and bark mulch were all installed under the tree's canopy. The residents as well were contacted again, outlining the plans and explanation of the protective surface that was put down to protect the wider area. And it was overall just an opportunity for more education as well, and more awareness about damage to roots and the significance that can have on the root system. In March 2020, I remember visiting the Grantham Oak during the reveal of the panel. There's like a panel there now, an interpretation panel that was installed under the tree, and you can read about the tree and the history of what was going on at the time that tree was a sapling. It's more established that tree as like a feature of the town. It's if I go to the next few slides, just going to go to, there we go, you can see the root protection area there. That's the fence post being installed with the rope. If I just go to the previous slide, sorry, I know I'm jumping about here slightly. Just wanted to show, this is not the Grantham Oak, but it shows the potential extent of roots and how far they can come from the trunk. So these lines of light show the major roots that for this tree that were mapped. So you can see just how far the roots spread and how easy it is to do damage to them. And in fact, another thing as we're mentioning about roots is just that how shallow they sit within the soil, even for a big tree like the Grantham Oak. Most of the roots will be confined to the top 50 centimeters of soil, in some cases the top 30 centimeters. So these large, sprawling, shallow roots are very easily damaged, which is why we wanted to fence this area off. As you can see, even where that fence is, the roots are going to extend far beyond at the beginning. That was the fence and the rope being installed, followed by the protective surfacing as well. And you can see the mulching has been added there as well, the bark chippings in the background. So these panels help to distribute the weight for any vehicles that are tracking over. It causes less disturbance to the soil as well. So even those roots that sit outside of the root protection area still have some light protection as well. And there we go. It featured in local news as well, gained the attention of lots of local press and local politicians as well, as I've already mentioned. And you can see one of our staff members having an interview for local media in front of the tree too. Oh, and here's an image of the sign that was installed. So this information panel, like I say, it tells you about sort of the history or the local history and the protection measures that we've gone to protect the tree, so that it's made and celebrated more as a success story, and celebrated as a local resident of the town, basically. And this sign was even unveiled by the town mayor as well. So it was an event that got lots of key people together, so key local people, and just to celebrate, this unveiling of the panel kind of marked a milestone in the protection of this tree. So it was great to have like a celebratory event like this. And of course, like, not every tree will get to experience this. We're not necessarily advocating that we would expect every tree to go to or to experience this level of protection and experience this level of celebration, but it just goes to, it's a nice kind of heartwarming story, really, of a tree that deserved that local protection and got it. And even now, the tree continues to gain more, add more to its kind of repertoire of ways it's been celebrated. It was nominated in 2020 again for the Tree of the Year competition and received second place in the UK. So it went from being a tree that at one time looked as though it was going to suffer irreplaceable damage, to a tree that actually won second place in the UK for Tree of the Year, which is a great success story. There we go. Even that gained local media attention as well. And then with the monies that were sort of awarded through that, that was used to install a signage trail as well. So in addition to having its own plaque immediately outside of the tree, it now also has signage that points local residents to the Grantham Oak. So it's gained even more respect locally. And even you can go on the ATI website. There's a QR code next to it which takes you to that web page, telling you more about the tree as well. There is, of course, another one I wanted to show you, which was this is the one, Top Trumps cards. So you may know that game Top Trumps, where you have different cards which have a different theme. In this case, the theme was Grantham historical landmarks. So there were other sort of local landmarks that are known, and the Grantham Oak featured as one of the cards. So it tells you here about its sort of year and visual impact and points. So it's just nice to see these extra ways in which the tree has been celebrated. And even in the local railway station, on the platform, you have a stained glass window, and the tree features there as well. You can kind of just see it in the middle below the T. So yeah, just a whole range of different ways in which this tree has been sort of protected and respected. And there's an image of it there with the bunting around, still growing proudly next to Belton Lane. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. I'm conscious of time, wanted to give enough time for questions as well. So just to give a plug for our Living Legends campaign. So it's launching very soon. It's going to be our long-term campaign, which we're leading to basically call for stronger protection for our oldest trees. And just to summarize very briefly of what we want to see from this, we're making a call for legal protection, so legally protected heritage status for some of our most ancient and important trees. Strong, consistent policy protection for these trees in each country. So at the moment in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, there's a slightly different wording around policies and protections for old trees. So it would be great to get a consistent approach for each country there. And also more support for land managers to care for their ancient and veteran trees. By more support, we're not necessarily saying, you know, financial support, but I think in this sense, even access to training or awareness or resources that at least help landowners to know what they have so that they can cherish them and look after them and respect them would be a great start as well. With ancient tree protection, it's, you know, it doesn't always have to be expensive. I mean, sometimes it can be simply a case of not tracking over the route area with your vehicle, for example, and just going around the route protection area, or, you know, diverting a footpath around so that it reduces footfall. Simple measures. I mean, that said, of course, the Grantham Oak, the protection measures for that tree came to around about £16,000 to £20,000. So there was still a lot of work when you take into account like the sign and the time for like arborists and the consultancy and the materials for like the track work. So it can be quite expensive to protect an individual tree depending on what measures are needed, but in a lot of cases it doesn't need to be as expensive as that. And so providing more support and just awareness and knowledge for landowners to look after their ancient veteran trees would be a great first step to seeing their long-term protection. So that's just a bit of an overview of what the main aims of the Living Legends campaign is. If you want more information, we're going to have a dedicated web page for it. So I've included it there. It's just basically the Woodland Trust website /Living Legends, and there'll be some more information about the campaign. Just to wrap up this talk, I just wanted to finish with a couple of things. The first was just a quick mention about the ancient tree inventory for anyone who might want to get involved. We currently have over 190,000 trees that are mapped already to the project. We have an online map that where you can see where those trees have been recorded already. So do help us to record these special trees. If you find them, you may already be thinking in your mind, oh, I know of a big tree that's in my local park, or you know, I've seen when driving to work. And if so, if it's not already recorded, then do register with the website and help us to map them by adding the information for that tree. The research that we're sort of about to have a bit of a PR launch soon about this research, so I'm not going to talk about it in great depth here, but the overall message is it suggests that we have a lot more to find. So we had a PhD study that was completed last year, and it's helped us to kind of look at how, or to kind of measure the completeness, if you like, how far we got to go to map them all. And the research shows that we're absolutely just at the infancy of doing this. Whilst we've recorded probably the largest ancient and veteran trees, there are still so many yet to be found, and probably more likely to be those such as like the hawthorn that I showed you, those trees that are maybe less obvious as being ancient or veteran. Or just linking back to Living Legends, the Living Legends campaign, as the ancient tree inventory is going to link in with that project later on in the year. So we're going to have an ancient tree inventory tree checking weekend, where we're going to be asking people to go and visit their nearest ancient tree and tell us, you know, is it still there? And if it's not, also tell us if it's fallen, if it's collapsed, or if it's partially collapsed. This will be sort of one of the first times that we've done something like this, where we're asking people to go and interact with the data that's already there, rather than specifically recording new trees necessarily. So if you see if you go visit your nearest ancient tree and it's still there and you want to update some of the information or add some photos, then you can do so. But equally, if that tree is no longer there, then it'd be really important if you could let us know, because to date we have less data about loss rates of ancient trees, and that's something we really want to find more about. You know, how many of these trees are we losing, where are we losing them, and what species are being lost. So you can help us to do that as an ongoing thing, but it's just to give you advance notice that there will be a tree checking weekend where we'll try and make it like a focused activity for a certain weekend later in the year. One of the most common questions I get asked as well is about what to do if I found a tree that's under threat. So, you know, if you found an ancient or veteran tree and it's threatened, similar like the Grantham Oak example, what can I do? We have a web page which I will share in the chat now. Just gonna do that, bear with me. There we go. So you can click that link and we've got a whole web page that talks about what to do if you found a threatened tree. Ultimately, you would need to contact our campaigns team. So that's campaigning@woodlandtrust.org.uk with as much information as you can, you know, particularly if you've got a like a planning application reference number, or, you know, if you can detail the exact tree and the exact location of it as well, and describe the threat, then that would be very helpful. The more information, the better. And of course, even better to that, if you can try and record that tree to the ancient tree inventory as well, prior to reporting it as a threatened tree. That way we can try and get it verified, and then our campaigns team can cross-reference that with the planning application details and the arboricultural report to kind of understand what the level of threat is to that tree. On the same web page, if we just go to the next slide, there are some other useful linked web pages. So for example, if you want to get advice on how to object to a planning application, or if you want to know more about tree preservation orders, or maybe you want to know more about how to set up a local group to help campaign for ancient tree or ancient woodland protection, then you can click on those and it will tell you more about those subjects, because they are arguably presentations in themselves. So that concludes my part of the talk. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you found that interesting to learn about, you know, examples of ancient urban trees. Hope you enjoyed listening to the case study about the Grantham Oak and that success story. And also do look out for our Living Legends campaign as well. Like I say, it's going to be a long-term campaign where we're making stronger calls for protection for these irreplaceable trees. And I hope will be a great success, one that we need more people to get behind. So there will be a petition, if you can look out for that and sign it as well. That would be a huge help too. Okay, folks, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and at this point, I'd welcome any questions as well. So, Greg, I don't know if there are any questions that have pulled through via the Q&A already.
Yeah, I had a question come in. Yeah, anybody has any questions, feel free to fire them into the Q&A. Yeah, big thank you for that, Tom. It's really, really great to see examples where trees like that have been protected, and especially, you know, taking note of the actual rooting environment, which is something that gets overlooked so often. So the first question is from Paul, and it's actually about the location of one of the trees. It's the topiary yew that was hollowing in the churchyard that was propped up as well. It's the location of that tree.
Oh yes, the one that was shared. Yeah, I can bring the slide back up if that would be helpful. But
yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah,
it's quite a remarkable looking tree.
So I realise I need to actually share my screen. That'd help. Yeah, so this one. So that's that's the one. So I've not written in the notes the tree. Normally I'm very good and I write the tree ID number and a URL for this tree, which I haven't done, which is not like me at all. What I will do though is I've got my sort of notes that I made when I was preparing this talk, and I'll be able to find the link to that tree. So what I suggest I do is if maybe if there's some way I can share that, perhaps if anyone would like to know, they could contact Ancient Tree Inventory at woodlandtrust.org.uk, or I don't know if there will be a follow-up email, Greg, that will go out to all attendees, and I can share it that way.
Could be, but it was Paul who asked the question. He's one of the Urban Tree Festival organisers, so you know, if you try to send it to me via email, I can pass it straight on.
Yeah, I'll pass that on for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so a question I had regarding the Grantham Oak. you may have mentioned it, I may have missed it in the presentation, but that entire process, was it a particularly challenging process in terms of the local political gears of movement, for want of a better phrase, or how challenging was it to actually get that whole thing initiated?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, I mean, I should say I wasn't working with the Woodland Trust at the time that started in 2017. But when I spoke to one of our members of staff, Denise, who I think is probably on this call actually, a few days ago, we were talking. That was one of my questions to her, because she very much led on that at the time, and the sense that I got was that you know, what was kind of useful at the time with this example is everyone was quite helpful. You know, like the council were really helpful, the residents were helpful, the utility company were helpful. So there wasn't really any roadblocks, if you like, that presented a barrier to that tree being protected. And you know, despite that, it shows though the time scale. If you remember, it was 2017 when this started through to 2020 when they had the unveiling of the plaque. So even still, that's a few years, you know, 3 years, despite the fact that there was cooperation from the start. It still took a while for these things to happen. So it just puts that in context of, you know, when there are perhaps maybe when there's less cooperation or parties that disagree, that could potentially go on for a lot of years. But no, in this situation, it was, from what I understand, there was a lot of interest in the tree, and I don't think anyone really, there wasn't really a voice against protecting this tree, put it that way. So there were no parties that were in favour of, you know, not protecting the tree. And there we go. I think Denise has posted in the chat yesterday on the webinar. Yeah, just reading your comment, Denise. Yeah, very straightforward, despite taking some time. So yeah, pretty much what I was saying there.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, but any more questions, please put me through. But another question. So about 200 meters where I currently am, there's a field that has an amazing old hedgerow with some amazing non-ancient veteran. We've got some incredible hawthorn that are all hollowed and leaning, wonderful ash, very decayed, and a stunning field maple. But the hawthorns especially just incredible. One's actually broken in half. But how challenging has it been to get recognition of the smaller trees such as the hawthorns and the field maples to be recorded, as opposed to the big grand trees like the oaks and the yews?
Yeah, definitely. So they certain, even though species like hazel, field maple, hawthorn, they still make up our sort of top 10 most recorded species across the UK. When you look at the percentages, I mean, like 46% of the data is oak, you know, within the ancient tree inventory. So like native oak, that is. So almost half of the records are already oak before you break it down into the other 200 plus species that we record. I think they're certainly less well represented, probably because of the fact that they don't reach those same impressive sizes. You know, for like an oak, a yew, a sweet chestnut, you can easily get ancient trees which are 6 or 7 meters plus in maiden girth. Whereas for like hawthorn, field maple, hazel, you know, you'd be doing well if you found one of those that was 3 meters in girth, and certainly 2 meters plus is starting to become a big tree for those, you know, for like hawthorn or field maple. So and particularly when they grow in a multi-stem form, that becomes even more tricky, because they don't show those same physical signs of aging. So such as like the decay features like hollowing trunk, hollowing branches, the things that visually make them look old are less obvious in those smaller grown species, which is why I think many people don't record them, because it's easy to just kind of walk past an old hawthorn and not necessarily realize how old it is. So it is a case of getting your eye. And obviously a tip for that would be, we've got a species guide on our website, on the ATI website, where it runs through like the top 10 or 11 most recorded species. And so you can get a feel for what is of a, or likely to be a significant size. But additionally, there's also the ATI data itself. So on the map, when you're browsing the map, you can see examples and use the filters. So if you wanted to know what ancient hawthorn looks like, you can put the ancient filter and the species filter, set it to hawthorn, and just have a look at what's already been recorded. You know, that will help to give you a sense of what these like smaller growing species look like when they're older. Yeah, so they'd just be my couple of tips there.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think probably the final question, looking at the time, it's about 2 minutes to answer this one. It's from Jessica Kerr. It's, do you have a favourite urban tree, or have you researched the local history or events that any of these trees may have witnessed?
Yeah, definitely. So a great question about do I have a favorite one? I think I probably have a new favorite tree every day, to be honest. It's part of the perk of having, you know, being able to sit in the crow's nest of the ancient tree inventory and see all these trees that are coming in and seeing what's been recorded and looking back through the data. Do I have a favorite urban tree? I mean, the thing is, when I get asked this question, I often find that it's the trees that are my favorites are trees that I've sort of visited myself. So, you know, last year I had the luxury of assisting with some video for the ancient tree inventory, where we went and visited that sweet chestnut that we saw in Buckingham Park, the example that I showed you with the you know, the historic map and the satellite image, and just kind of like seeing that in person was just mind blowing to see how big it was. So that's probably one of my more memorable ancient urban tree experiences for sure. Not sure if I'd go as far as say I have a favorite, because I just it's just impossible to choose. But just to pick up on the sort of the second part of the question, I would say, yeah, it's looking at the local history and events. That's almost like that as part of the fun of the ancient tree inventories. You get to be like a local detective, if you like, looking into the history of these trees, and often like local historical archives and museums can be great sources of information. Obviously, Google is always a great place to start as well. You know, looking at I find that trying to Google like the former land use is the best way, or looking at old maps is a great way as well to sort of try and interpret what's happened. So that's what I did with the example on Buckingham Park, looking at the old map and seeing that there used to be an old house there and it was probably a private estate. You know, that obviously takes us only so far back in history, but what we know from ancient tree distribution is that ancient veteran trees are often more likely to be found on these sites where they were sort of private and protected, and they've been allowed to grow without any kind of development. So yeah, that's I guess it's unique to each tree. You know, not every ancient and veteran tree will have a story to tell that's well known. You know, some trees may well be named after some of our monarchs. So, for example, we have a few trees that are called the Queen Elizabeth Oak, which are named because it's believed in the past, you know, Queen Elizabeth would have visited that tree, perhaps. Some trees are named after certain events as well, or certain people. For example, up in Scotland, we have Neil Gow's Oak, named after the famous Scottish musician Neil Gow. He was reported to have written and composed some of his music underneath that very tree. So not every tree will have that same kind of story, and it's so many of these trees have untold stories. To be honest, it's part of the fun is just trying to just find out more about them, I suppose.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot for that. We're going to have to close off the webinar now because it's 2 o'clock. Yeah, big thank you, Tom. That was really fascinating, interesting as always. Anything to do with ancient trees is always a really popular part of the Urban Tree Festival, so it's always great to try and promote how we can protect them. Yeah, big thank you to everyone for attending. Yeah, by all means, check out the rest of what we're offering for the festival. and I hope you have a great day and rest of the week. And yeah, thank you again to Tom. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.